I want to welcome three guests to talk about applied research today. And I've defined applied research for them in a sense, but I don't expect that they'll follow that entirely. This panel is actually more geared toward the co-design or participatory design end of applied research, and all of our guests have experience in this area. Martha Cohen, for years, led participatory design practice projects, and most perhaps recently and famously organized the Puerto Rico Restart sets of workshops, which began right after the Irma Maria events and continue to this day, but also has other local participatory design experience as well. Jeff Carney leads FIBRE, Florida Institute for Built Environment Resilience, and in its kind of the way that it interacts with communities around the state, some of the funded research engages in this type of work as well. And last but not least, Sarah Gamble is here, and her real purpose in coming back and seeking position in the academy, if you will, is to try to engage participatory design practices, teach them, and create opportunities for students to learn these practices. So I'm going to let Sarah kick us off. And if you all want to add anything to the introduction that I've given, because it was quite brief, please do. You can start with that and then dive into some of the work. As with our previous panels, the panels have, 10 or 15 minutes to go through and describe what it is that they're doing, focused on their choice of methodology. And then we'll have a chance for them to talk to each other and us to engage in some conversation. So thank you, Sarah.
Okay. Thanks for having me and the invitation. I'm going to share screen so that we can look at some slides together here. Okay. Again, yes, applied research. I focused my images and as well as the discussion for today on community engagement and people-centered applied research, because I thought that might maybe give a bit of diversity with our other guests, who I'm not sure what they're going to talk about from their work today. But to give you a little bit of background, my focus is on community design, also known as public interest design, and it's an inherently participatory and human-centered practice. It's quite collaborative, and it draws on a range of academic and professional fields, everything from architecture to public art to other built environment fields like engineering, as well as landscape architecture. It also draws on the social sciences and the humanities. So it tries to bring those outside of the built environment fields and the design world into the mix, right? That we can build collaborative projects together. And that's really, I would say, the root of the practice. Community design as a term in the States really evolved out of the 60s and 70s. As an activist-centered way of practicing architecture, and has kind of evolved into a model under the title of public interest design, where we're focused on the public realm, but we're also focused on the term. It really originated from a pairing with architecture in the same way we could think about medical practice as having kind of private practice and then public health. And so the two kind of pair and complement each other. But it sets up a way to just be thinking about architecture as a service, like a model for service and a model for engaging the broader community. I've always loved this kind of related definition of communitecture, where it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it really draws on the idea of design and architecture for the common good over the focus on the designer themselves, that they're really trying to bring together groups of people to serve the broader public. So much of my work in relationship to community design focuses on context and the places that we work. And I believe that it's should be a primary focus of our work to understand the places and the people that we work with. And those includes like a broad kind of swath of information: physical, cultural, social, ephemeral. And it really is dependent on the place itself of which one of these might be more prominent. But I think they're all relevant in all cases. Community engagement is a big part of what I do. And that would be, I guess, one of our methods that we could talk about today in terms of methodology. It's the process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geographic proximity. Now, this is a federal government definition that really tries to look at it from a very broad perspective, as opposed to one that's solely based on built environment practice. Affiliated by geographic proximity, special interest, or similar situations to address issues affecting the well-being of those people. So for me, I have spent quite a bit of time doing applied research in the realm of community engagement, and most recently in the realm of where public art and community engagement intersect. And I'm going to share some examples of that today. In relationship to community engagement, this is my go-to resource, which is the AIP2 spectrum of public participation. This organization, or the International Association of Public Participation, has trainings around the world. I have found them to be really valuable. I hold a certificate from this organization, and they meet periodically throughout the United States, and you can sign up to go to their trainings. But this is their chart that helps engagement professionals to more carefully and clearly communicate with the public. And I love the spectrum in that when we work with communities, it's going to be on a range. And at one end, our sole purpose would be informing the public, right? Sharing information with them, helping them to become educated on a topic. At the other end, we might be aimed at empowering them, right? And we can think of empowerment, the primary example of that is voting, right? So if you can kind of think of the way that we work with the public, it really fits on this spectrum. And so it's really important at the beginning of any project to try to communicate with the public and set expectations to find yourself on the spectrum, so that both the designers and the public are really clear on where they stand. And I think this is essential to applying this methodology of community engagement. So today I'm going to spend most of my time talking about two examples of arts-based engagement. And this is really bringing in creative activities into the engagement process. And if you've been to a public meeting in your life, or maybe as part of your degree program, most of these meetings are likely held in some sort of interior environment, like a high school gymnasium or a community center, maybe a library. And there's someone at the front of the room, and they're guiding you through a series of questions. And maybe you're raising your hand and sharing information. Or you might be working in a small group, kind of maybe drawing on maps, or sharing some sort of preferences or ideas that you might have about a built environment project, like a new library or maybe a park space. And that model, I think there are better ways to do it. And that's one of the things that I try to explore through my work, is the way that we set up situations for us to engage with the public and the public to engage with us. And that might be around education or advocacy, but it always relates to the built environment. And so arts-based engagement tries to put making or kind of visual exercises at the center, as opposed to verbal communication, because we often find with that type of verbal sharing that there's a lot of barriers. There might be language barriers, there might be confidence barriers, there might be just personality barriers, like people being less likely to want to stand up in a meeting of 100 people and share their ideas or information. And so we need to find new ways to engage the public and create kind of an even playing field, right, for us all to share information in different modes and in different ways. So arts-based engagement really aims to do that. And I would say a big component of it also is meeting people where they are, rather than asking them to come to a place that is likely removed from the future project that plans that, you know, the meeting would be centered around to discuss, is going them to where they are, right? So rather than meeting in that high school gymnasium, you know, maybe meeting in the future park, right? Meeting on the raw land or in the, you know, the industrial site, to try to look at it together and try to create a collective understanding of the place and the ideas for the future project, right? So I'm in my examples, I'll explain a bit more about what I mean by meeting them where they are. So this first project I'm gonna talk about is based in Austin, Texas. It's back from into 2013, and it's a really straightforward example of how we can meet them in the park, right? This is Town Lake Trail. It's a loop that surrounds down the Colorado River has been dammed in downtown Austin, and it's kind of the primary body of water. People walk, bike, move along it. It's really Austin Central Park, and it's where people go to mix and mingle and kind of enjoy the environment. So the stewards of this area of town is the Trail Foundation. So this trail provides a 1, a 3, and a 5-mile loop for running, biking, and any sort of other recreational activity. And they've been doing a series of restrooms along the trail. So you can imagine building these small restroom, almost pavilion-like spaces in a very natural environment. And so they've engaged a series of architects over a long period of time. And so the Trail Foundation wanted to do a new restroom in this location that I'm showing you here in the bottom left image. And at the same time, they wanted to engage the users of the trail in the process. And so we were invited to design a physical installation to engage the users of the trail. We designed a 36-foot-long timeline. We researched the history of the trail and showcased it visually using photographs and other data to explain. And we asked trail users to come to write their stories physically on the board of their experiences on the trail. Right, so you can imagine them out there with Sharpies. This was in situ for 1 week. So we were out there kind of facilitating the engagement and asking people to share and to stop along their runs, right? We didn't need to plan any sort of meeting, right? We just met them where they were here in their exercise and in their walking and in their enjoying of downtown. We got 1,700 stories in a 5-day period. And so you can see here in the bottom right, the board was completely covered and actually had to move to the back before the week was over. We got great news coverage, and it really kind of generated a lot of marketing and excitement around the project. We took the stories and physically typed everyone up and then went through an analysis process to begin to understand the stories themselves. And so we really we analyzed them on 2 dimensions. On the left here, you can see the kind of the people or the users who were talked about in the story. Was it the story writer walking alone? Was it them telling a story about someone else? Was it them with others? Was it them and the trail, right? We could begin to categorize the story about who was present in it. And then we could categorize the story based on topic or focus. And so we articulated a series of kind of themes, and then we analyzed the story around those themes. And so we could categorize and begin to see, how are people showing up to the trail? How are they using it? And we could begin to share this type of programmatic and use information with the architect and with the trail information, both as a way to shape architectural design, but also as a way to celebrate the trail and to celebrate this physical environment, and to begin to understand how the public perceives the environment and how they use it, right? So we went through and numerically, gave each story a number, and then categorized them. So for example, physical health, we saw 17% of the stories kind of fall within this topic and category. Family and friends, right? Seeing how people show up and the type of story that they shared. Oh, the one thing I would add is this physical installation was also paired with an online survey, and it was kind of facilitated over several weeks, and we only could get 500 responses. And to me, it was a really telling example about how people are really enthusiastic about sharing their stories and it kind of engaging with others physically in person in the site. When it got to this kind of online environment, people were just really less interested to respond and to engage in the project. And so those questions were a bit more technical and a bit more programmatic. And those 500 responses we did get paired really well with this experiential information and could feed the future design process by the architect. And now the Trail Foundation, it's been almost 10 years, they conclude every monthly newsletter with a story from the project. And they've actually done follow-up projects in the same vein to gather more stories along the way. I've done similar installations also on the Atlanta Beltline in following years after this one. And I hope to do more, right? Because I think this is a great method and model to bring storytelling into architectural projects and really try to understand users in this particular way. In more recent times, I've been working on 2 publications that are just coming out this semester, kind of coincidentally. One is about house relocation. And this is an example of a topic that I noticed a need in the environment and then worked with locals in Austin to develop a resource. And now we're going to publish it through the city's leading historic preservation nonprofit. And I pose it as an example of both playing offense and defense in architecture. I'll use my sports analogies this morning. In that sometimes clients come to us with ideas and projects, and we work with them to develop those projects. Other times we see a need or have an idea ourselves, and then can go out there and try to find a way to make it happen. So that would be an example of this, of seeing a need in the community, seeing something that if I could advocate for its use, house relocation, for its environmental, for its historic preservation benefits, for its retention of community fabric, for the way that it can fight local gentrification. This is a way that I can produce a public guide that communicates with the development community and tries to encourage them to consider the practice, right? For many of these reasons for community benefit. Another recent publication is a new book that's coming, that's literally was just released about a week ago, that is about environmental education and how we how we as designers can advocate for environmental activism through our work. And this book centers on a design build program at the University of Texas at Austin that designs spaces for the community to engage in environmental education. And so it's really the back and forth that I'm interested in understanding, how Coleman Coker, who's the lead faculty here, has created an opportunity for the public to engage with the students and the students to engage with the public, and to create spaces for the public to then use in perpetuity in the future. So everyone is learning about the environment at the same time through the design process and through the result of the process. And so this example, one of the primary methodologies was interviews. So I interviewed 40 individuals for the book, and we have populated it full of quotations and perspectives from clients, from users, and from the student designers throughout the book. And I just want to conclude with one last project that I'm working on right now called Why We Walk. This is something that really looks at walking as a tool for exploring contexts in our physical environment. And it's something that we can do in collaboration with the public, right? It's a way for us to get out into the environment and to be looking collectively and intentionally at places and spaces in anticipation of design improvements or a design project for a particular place. So I've been working over the last couple of years to design a series of walking exercises that we as designers can use in the design process as a tool, but also exercises that the public can either do with us or on their own to also understand those places and maybe look at it from a different perspective. So I'm giving you the primary research question here in terms of methodology. Can prescriptive walking experiences as a tool for the design process foster learning and engagement with project context and stakeholders? When and how can it be applied? So I'm in the process of developing 20 exercises and testing them from the perspective of the public and from the designer's perspective. So I'm giving you some shots here from a University Scholar student poster that she's going to present this week, that she kind of joined me in the research in looking at walking and testing the exercises with Design 6 students from John Mays' class and in her own work. Let's see here. The 20 exercises fall in these 5 categories. And you can see here, I'm giving you 2 drawing examples on the left from one of my Quest students, which is a from an academic field outside of the built environment. And then on the right here from an architecture student. So giving them the same assignment, same topic of investigation, and seeing the comparative response from these 2, right? And it's not an artistic analysis, right? I'm not looking to see who can draw better, but it really begins to engage the subject matter of the built environment. How do these different groups of people look at the built environment? How comfortable are they with the built environment? How can the information or the perspective gained through walking and drawing teach us about the place through the process? Here's a couple of additional examples, right, of same exercise, different groups of people. So looking at it and capturing the built environment in really different ways. Right. And fortunately, I've just gotten a grant to purchase a dispenser, which you can see right here. This is a dispenser from a French company, Short Edition, where I will be placing this dispenser on campus during summer B, and students will be able to come up to the dispenser, hit it, a walk will come out, a walking exercise, and they'll be able to go on this walk on campus and then can respond. I'll have an incentive for them. And I'm thinking $5 gift card, either to the dining hall or Starbucks or to a place on campus, where they can participate in the research by doing the walk and then responding with their feedback and sharing the visual exercise that's produced as a product. So I will conclude there. I hope I've stayed within my 15 minutes. If I haven't, I apologize.
No, that's fantastic, Sarah. And I really appreciate, I want to point out to the class just before we go on, I'll have, I think Martha go next and we'll wrap up with Jeff, if that makes sense. I appreciate the different scales that you made available here in the public engagement and the ways of thinking about applied research. And of course, that you highlighted ways that the knowledge is disseminated in different ways as well. Sarah, thanks so much. And
Sure.
Class, remember, keep notes of your questions. Thank you.
I wonder if it wouldn't be good to have the questions.
Do you want to do questions in between? Because what often happens with questions in between is that rolls and rolls. I'm okay as a moderator, Martha, but I'm not great.
Okay. Okay, so shall I?
Yes, go ahead and share and give us a little description of your approaches.
Okay, I will disappoint you in that I do not have a presentation, but I do require the students to actually take note. First, I want to say hi to my students that have had me in the past. Hello, it's good to see you again. So I would say I started my research life in the University of Cambridge, and that was very similar to whatever we call now AI, is to say a highly technological research into constructing mathematical models that now you would call digital twins, is to say data-based description and of urban settings, but also into discovering the trends and ways of operating of the phenomena in the urban realm. That allowed us to not only have a control, shall we say, on what we could change or not change in a master plan, but also to predict the future. Now, did this research work? I mean, there's a ton of publications about it, but it never really caught the public eye because it didn't have participation. So here I'm referring to what Sarah has been talking about, which is participation. And all the subsequent research projects that have come my way are very much centered on the fact that people not only participate, but are the real drivers of what we are doing. So I would say change to a more humanistic based approach. All right. So I have 6 points to make. One, I mean, this was applied widely. I know you can go to my website, CHU, and www.chudcpufl.edu and see the range of examples that we have developed. But 6 points, I think, are going to be made. So one is subject involvement in immersion. So listening to the stakeholders, engage with the accumulated knowledge in all those minds that are participating in the project. So the human factor, the youth, the aspirations, the political views, all of that comes not from probably a systematic approach, or it could come, but it's much quicker when we have the subject involvement directly in the project. And number two, is inclusive interdisciplinary views. I mean, we thought architects could do everything. We thought so. But it tends now to be clearer that we need all the interdisciplinary collaborations to be able to get to good results. And I would say, I in my former classes, I could say the example of what happened in 1950s. So what was happening in the knowledge or research in the natural world in the 50s? You had zoology, you had botany, you had geology or astronomy or climatology. All these disciplines were exploring their own set of lines, and nobody was understanding anything. It wasn't until the mid-60s when we understood ecology as something that would put together, okay, with this soil, with this temperature, with this rain pattern, with this is the natural environment that can make sense, okay? So for us in the built environment, it's also true. And we have been partitioned very much, and we, between urban, interiors, you name it, and we need to have this cohesive reassembly, shall we say, of the disciplines. So that was the second, which was inclusive interdisciplinary views that we must incorporate now. The third is the futuristic trends. For this, the French are the best. I've learned a lot with, following some students in La Sorbonne and what the French are up to. Having a vision of the future more than what we have from the past or even the present is a must. Is to say, every time we draw construct something, it's going to be lasting 50 years, 100 years. It must work in the future. So the research of the future is what takes our expectations for a success. Because, I mean, we can extrapolate from the past easily. I mean, we take all the data, analyze the data, know whether, but what is the future? That is something that we need to dream about. As an example of this, a recent research that we did, it was called master plan research. It wasn't master plan. It was the reimagining of the Volusia County Fairgrounds. It's published in our website. You can go and explore it. I would say it had, I can cite a few of the aspects of it. It was interdisciplinary completely, is to say the people that were participating were Cattlemen Association or the Fairgrounds Association or the Farm Bureau that finances the agricultural things and manages the farmers markets, the Volusia County officials, UF Extension, and us. So it was very interesting to try to gather these very strong stakeholders, trying to see what the future would be like for 100-acre installation in D-land that is not pursuing the trends of the past, where they were selling cattle, they were having shows of breeders and things like that. So together we kind of tried to imagine the future. I think that was pretty successful in a way. because we transformed, we presented at the county council, and we were applauded, and they told us, you gave us hope that we can create a future. So what we were looking into is what are the future trends that could impact the countryside that would be developed or could be developed in the fairgrounds. Number 4, and I pay a lot of attention to this issue, is iterative visioning. Is to say, we can spend a lot of time trying to create something fabulous, or we can spend less time and propose something and then subject it to critique by the stakeholders, by the public, by others. They will clam us down as they have last week in Huilaca. Yeah, I'll talk to you about Huilaca then. But yes, so we propose and repropose and repropose, and every time we are just the catalyst of trying to vision the future or the proposal. I must say, it takes an effort to be iterative, and it takes also a stepping down from believing that we have the sealed, solution. No, but what we are good at in this research initiatives is to put together something and then be brave and take the axe and allow it to be critiqued and then go further. So that was number 4. Number 5, I would say that design for me has been this negotiation of the cultural, geographical, technological, economical pools. Everybody's pulling in this or that direction. And so an integrated settlement is at the end what might be the result of what we are trying to put forward, and not the, shall we say, specialistic or better solution of some of the aspects of something we are taking further. And lastly, I would say all these efforts needs to be financed. So when I was working in the research methods class, I had a couple of sessions on formulating grants and illustrating how can we, and I see experts here in the panel, Jeff or Sarah, I mean, how can we direct our research in it to be so serious that it is funded, right? On Huilaca, let me tell you, Huilaca town center, that is a small little town. Everybody wants to have a say on it. The neighbors don't want change. They made polls and they say we don't want to change anything, but change is impending on the town. And so the Northeast Regional Planning Council solicited our collaboration to actually try to incorporate the fact that north of town, there's going to be a huge development that is going to have impact on the town. So what I would say, would put together most of these 6 aspects for me is this methodology of workshops. Okay, we have started working on workshops 1993 in the city of Naples, and involving public officials, involving population in a short 3 weeks. At that time, it was 3 weeks. you come up with proposals for the most pressing issues. That methodology was then used in Uruguay from 1998 to 2003. And I was lucky enough to start it again here for Puerto Rico. Though I had proposed for Orlando, but we couldn't get it flying. And what this methodology does is accelerate the results. Is to say, we give ourselves only 10 days or maybe a week to come with prepared material, but involving all the actors, municipal agencies, FEMA, the karst friends, the universities, and come up with a very, shall we say, integrated and firm proposals in a very short time. Again, here we go to the iteration situation in which they are discussed and changed and all of that. But I thought it's a shortcut. It's a shortcut to achieving results. I'm not saying all the other methodologies of research are not valid. Of course they are as well. But to me, with the pace of change of society nowadays and the urgency of some of these activities, especially with the sea level rise, with the hurricanes and disasters that we see with more frequency, having quick, integrated, participatory, futuristic looking research proposals it's to me a way forward. So that is it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Martha. And you know, the goal of this session is to expand the knowledge in the book, and your 6 points actually take the more general outline that Murtowski gives and expands that in a kind of a very practical but also inspiring way of thinking about engagement. So hopefully you guys got all these notes. I did, and I might share them with you, but
I can write it up.
yeah, no, I think they've got it, right? You've all got it. So
I got a few, yes.
yeah, okay, good. And of course we've got this recorded so you can go back and look at it again. I love the idea that these 6 points represent a methodology of workshops to accelerate outcomes, because the pace of change and difficulty of problems we face today requires an approach like this. And of course, engaging both a broad range of experts, and that I wish I had caught the exact words you used, Martha, but about the vastness of the human knowledge. And that's a paraphrase, but that's a great deal of our goal here in engaging broader ranges of stakeholders and participants in our design problems. Jeff.
Hello, everybody. Okay, take it away. This is great, and I hope I dovetail with what Sarah and Martha have started to talk about. So I'm going to go through a ton of slides, which is a personal failing because I'm terrible at editing, but I'll go quickly. And let's see here. Oops, that's not the one. That's the one. Here, start at the beginning. Okay, I've titled this Resilience Thinking Action Research. And really, action research is the sort of the process of doing of actually making measurable change in communities at the time that you're doing research. So how are we keeping broader concepts and broader questions alive in terms of a research sense, but we're actually making change on the ground. And I think Martha and Sarah really speak to that. And then how do we get those things together? So is there a way that sort of transdisciplinary process of making sort of in a practice sense, making change, but then also kind of going back and reflecting upon it. This is Fiber. Real briefly, we're a collection of faculty across DCP, from planning, landscape architecture, construction management, interior design, and architecture. And so a lot of the work I do sort of hits on two types of engagements. First is the city intensives, and we're currently working in Port St. Joe, Cedar Key, Cape Coral, and Lee County after the Hurricane Ian, and in Jacksonville. And these are communities where we have a really embedded presence. We've been working in Port St. Joe for 4 years. We're working in these other places, just beginning in some cases 2 years in Jacksonville, just recently started in Cedar Key and Cape Coral. But Cedar Key also has generations of UF presence and work. So hopefully building upon some of that, but really the intense kind of engagement of a long-term commitment. And then that's balanced. And in a sense, the measurable engagement side is more the city intensives, but then we think about regional collectives, right? So what's the overall synthetic outcome of action across these different areas? And so we have a grant looking at the Gulf South, the entire coast of Florida, and how a series of studio projects are collectively kind of contributing to ideas about the entire region. The I-10 corridor, it's a dashed line because it's not a funded project at the moment, but it's something we're trying to do. It's really thinking about, as Florida changes, as it grows, how is it going to start to fill in that corridor? And are there ways we can think about the ecosystem and the development patterns now before it sort of fills in? And then in terms of inland migration, and these are all related, but how are we, we might be doing something very specific in Cedar Key, but it's contributing to a broader understanding across the region. One of the places we start with resilience and fiber is really looking at the kind of position of humanity at this point. And this is some maps on the left, or the reddish ones are human measures of Earth systems. The blue are natural measures of Earth systems. Or ecological measures. Clearly, after about 1950, we fundamentally transformed our impact on Earth. And I think Martha is talking about the quantitative aspects of this. We have exceeded in a dramatic way the carrying capacity of the planet. So not to overstate it, but we've kind of done that. And there's really no way to, I would argue that we can't exactly be sustainable in a world that we have fundamentally altered, right? So the green line is the supposed kind of carrying capacity of Earth. And if you see some of these measures with biodiversity, climate change, and fertilizers basically have completely exceeded the carrying capacity of the planet. And so we're starting to see those impacts, right? In terms of gradual changes of sea level rise, of heat, of species migrations, and then the abrupt changes of storms and flooding. When you look at it in sort of temperature over the last 500 million years, you see that the last 10,000 years, the span of more or less humanity in terms of cities and agriculture and all of the things that we kind of take for granted, happened in a time where the temperatures were extraordinarily stable. And so in the last 100 years, we've seen a spike in temperature that goes well outside of what the Holocene was. So we're off the chart, so to speak, in terms of the predictability that we're used to. So we're looking at a very uncertain, or sort of a deeply uncertain future, as the grant on the right presents. How do we operate in that? And this to point out that humanity is going to keep on going, whether we, as the sort of design, planning, the educated organizations who seem to, we think we have the answers. Humanity is going to keep growing, right? It's going to keep happening. And so how do we get our heads around the processes? If we're only going to have an impact on 5% of the world's growth, then we're going to see a lot more places like this, a lot more unplanned settlements. And how do we better understand the needs of people in these processes so as to impact the way the world grows. So what we look at is really, I think this quote sums it up. At the heart of resilience thinking is a very simple notion that things change. And to ignore or resist this change is to increase our vulnerability and, importantly, forgo emerging opportunities. I mean, that's where this goes from a sort of bad news, oh like, my God, what do we do? To the opportunities. I mean, we all thrive on change. And so we got a lot of change coming our way. So I think that as designers, we need to think about how we can turn those changes into opportunities instead of risks. Three ways we do our research, and first is understanding our constituents' values and the agency that they have in those decisions. Both Sarah and Martha spoke about that. How do we engage people in the process of making change? Complexity of coupled socio-ecological systems. So cities are extremely complex. How do we understand them and how do we move them in a positive direction? Third, taking a design thinking approach. So how do we get past the kind of knowable and start to envision futures that are actually we don't know yet? Constituent values. Values are the motive behind purposeful action. So if we want to make change, we better empower the people that live in a community to make that change. And so this is a project we've done in Port St. Joe. And we've been working there for years. And what I'm going to talk about, and real briefly, a program that we run called the Florida Resilient Cities Program helps communities across the state to develop that capacity to respond to disasters and to be more resilient to risk. And so this was a video that we did in service of a project to reconsider the water management system in the city. And to do this, we, first of all, sort of acknowledging that communities are burdened with not only the damage from a disaster at this point, but the uncertainty of the next steps. It's not this idea, oh, let's build back, we want our community back. That doesn't work in a place that's right up against the coast. There is no return to some sort of previous state. It's going to be a new state. And often the effort, and in Port St. Joe, it was very specifically sort of one Port St. Joe. There's a sort of mantra that everyone gets behind, but a lot of times that sort of misses underlying vulnerabilities. In this case, a lot of the social vulnerabilities. And so we interviewed these three people, Ms. Likely, Mr. Ashbrook, and Dr. May, all really coming at from very different walks of life in this community. This is about a 17-minute video. I can get you the link. We're not going to watch it now. But really, this was a question of how do we incorporate the engineered, the ecological, and the social mechanisms of resilience. We ran a series of workshops after the interviews, consulted with a group of experts. The workshop at the bottom is very much as Sarah presented, a walking workshop where we actually walked the waterway with all of the community members. And that led to a project where really what we're looking at here is this green area in the middle. It goes all the way through the city. Those three individuals live in different sections of that town and really engaged it in very different ways. There's ecological and as well as built environment ways of dealing with it. And then there were three focuses actually corresponding with their communities where their particular needs and desires were represented moving forward. And so this is moving forward through grant funding now for the National Academy of Sciences and the Florida Department of Environmental Planning. And so, that's really, I think, getting at that heart of how do we engage the needs of people in a how do we actually communicate and understand and listen? Another approach is this question of complexity of coupled socio-ecological systems. This is a model of a city or a company, and you'd start to see how the city and the company and the products, everything is moving around, and there's multipliers and there's impacts where you might not expect one thing to affect another. And a lot of times cities are like that. You think, oh, we can solve crime by, arresting a lot more people. And, 10 years later, you realize that, in fact, that didn't solve crime at all. Well, why is that? Maybe it was because the educational system was broken. Maybe there weren't enough jobs. There's a lot of, in a city or a built environment, there's a lot of factors that come together. So this is looking at Jacksonville and specifically the Creek Network. Very diverse team of designers, housing experts, health experts, environmental researchers, and then our community partners, UF Health, Groundworks Jacksonville, and LISC, dealing with issues of health, environment, and housing. And I'm going really fast, but I'll get you all the presentation later. The fundamental question here was, how do we work on these three factors, health, housing, and environment, without any one of those factors inadvertently missing or actually disrupting the others? Because imagine you could fix the environment and it might make housing extremely expensive, which is going to displace a community of people who are already burdened. We might be able to fix the environment that might provide a lot of health opportunities for people, but are poorer people who are working 50 hours a week really going to jump on a bike and ride the bike path? So is that benefit serving the population that lives there? So real quickly, and this gets to the real quantitative aspect, not my specialty, but other people on the team, where we looked very quantitatively at all of the different factors, and this is health and housing and how these things correlate. We then took that data and started to ground truth it through a series of community walks, similar to what Sarah talked about, where we walked these transects across the city. That led us to a series of workshops where we started to build a systems model. These are community members kind of reflecting upon what we determined. But what this adds up to is a model of that community where health measures, housing measures, and environmental measures all kind of quantitatively work together, which allowed us to sort of really, ground truth what people were saying, get their input, and then finding ways that, say, a housing organization could meaningfully impact the future of housing in relation to environment, in relation to health. The third part, taking a design thinking approach, and this is key, and this is a quote from Herbert Simon: "To design is to devise courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones." And I think it's really important. We as designers, we envision preferred solutions. We dream of ideas that aren't achievable to make them achievable, right? And then we have to figure out how to get it done. But that's really important that we can dream that up. This is a project called the Giving Delta, looking at the Mississippi River. Again, super big, diverse team. We'll go into how all of these people are. But this was the problem. The Mississippi River, Louisiana coast in 2015. This is what it's going to look like in about 75 years. That's scary. And so what we looked at was the critique of saying, all right, it's decaying and it's doing it in a very fragmentary, unplanned way. So how do we empower the river? The tool at our disposal was the river itself, to envision a radically different future for this environment. And where that led us to, and I'm going through a 2-hour presentation in 3 minutes, but it led us to this. The point here was that we had to get past the sort of possible or the probable and think about the possible in order to then go back and start to talk about, well, how would we move water and sediment back into this environment to build land? And last, real quick, I just wanted to say, I do teach architecture, even though everything else that you've seen is really planning and landscape. That seems to be a lot of the scale that we work at. But in reference to teaching and the school, I teach in the architecture department and do a lot of teaching. I wish we had more research around architecture, but building scale, I should say. This was a project in Nantucket, in looking at the long-term future of Nantucket in relation to climate change. Big class of D8 students a couple of years ago. First, really thinking about kind of design as engaging issues of change and that ephemerality of the environment. And this is just some preliminary studies by students looking at the dynamic environment. This is clearly by the palm trees. You would know it's not Nantucket, this is Florida, before we went there. And then second was, how do we understand place? So this is just one image trying to understand place. In this case, this was COVID time, so we weren't able to go. So it was really trying to understand the place through the act of drawing, through research. And then last, a series of scenarios. And this was about looking at Nantucket moving forward. How do we accommodate, protect, or retreat into the future? And there were 4 teams, each of them taking on a kind of transect from water to highland. 4 students would share a site, and then they would each develop a dwelling, a housing unit, or a building that would look at change over time, as you see in the final little drawing there. And so real quickly, these projects looked at a range of different future scenarios, and we had it defined by generations. So generation 1 today, generation 2, 25 years from now, generation 3, 50 years in the future. And you can see how over time, the idea was, you know, we could reject the water, we could accept the water, we could retreat, but we had to have a position on how change would happen over time. And just see a couple of the different examples of the developments that were the architectural developments proposed. This one really got into the sort of way that the environment would, or that the housing would adapt to change. And that's it. Currently working on another project up in the Northeast in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and continuing on the Gulf Coast work here in Florida. That's it. Thank you.
Fantastic. And that was a dense, but I think comprehensible journey through
Okay.
some of the fiber activities. And so it's easy to see how these 3 faculty researchers' work is applied and overlaps, and all the kind of things that the practices that they're engaging in and how they do it. I want to just say, I think because of Fiber's team and the scale of the funded research, that diverse team and approach, and using that wide range of methods to engage the problem, especially as we were seeing in the Jacksonville stuff. Jeff, you know, he says quantitative is not his thing. We all have to make those kind of statements about ourselves, but understand that having team members, as Martha pointed out, this interdisciplinary way of engaging gives us the ability to do bigger things with bigger problems, and that none of it makes any difference at all without, you know, where we started with Sarah, which is the kind of closeness and the engagement that we get with people who are fully capable of helping solve these problems. We need them. So class, open to you for questions or discussions, not just about method, but if you have any
I think
other.
Martha has a comment or question.
Yeah, Martha.
I have a comment, and that is, you can find a commonality in Sarah, Jeff, and myself. It is that always the students are present.
That's
I mean,
right.
that is a very important aspect. I mean, I always refer to that book, The 3 Horizons, which is why, you know, the young minds in an unrestrained situation can come up with the innovative views that we are trying to put forward. Yeah.
Yeah, a good book.
So
Martha.
feel empowered, students, you know?
Also, I did also appreciate how you can see the scales present, that we all, I think students and ourselves, we want to work in these big scales, and we often, it's not, we can have ideas about it, but ultimately our training in this program is at a much different scale. It's at the scale of architecture and buildings. It's a professional program, so you know, you maintain this focus on that particular level of artifact, but that looking at these 3 presentations, you see the interaction between those scales and the importance that each one plays. So we can't, while we might see ourselves wanting to act in a larger context, we shouldn't feel that the exploring problems and ideas in the shape of a building is not insignificant.
And Stephen, I can say, reflect on that a little bit in my own experience. I came out of graduate school and got a job where the first thing we started to do was take on the transformation of a 3,000 unit, like 200-acre housing development. And it was totally out of the scale of the architect, but we were asked to do it within a firm where there were planners, but they asked the architecture group to do it, particularly because of the way we approached the problem as a nested operation, that the big picture was told through the detail. And I think that is something that we can do, and you all should take that, because yeah, you should talk about the big picture. I mean, I don't think that architecture should be limited as an object that is self-referential. It should be part of a bigger story. And as you think about research and your thesis, that the architecture is almost the test of the bigger theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can imagine, like, for example, the architect's point of view, or the ability of an architect to help the story be present in the architecture, where we started with Sarah, the impact on the thing that is made and the way that it interacts with the people that it serves. You don't get that typically from the engineer or the planner.
But making a reference to the first part of Jeff, world analysis or contemporary views, even at the small scale, I mean, we do not want to be, as we said, rearrange the lounge chairs in the Titanic. Okay.